The blood never dries on Khorne's throne. It steams instead, a living thing, flowing in slow rivers across brass steps carved from the skulls of extinct gods. Every heartbeat of the warp echoes with the same truth. None have ever challenged the Lord of Battle and survived. And yet, in an age long forgotten by mortal calendars, one warrior dared to raise his blade not for Khorne's glory, but against it. They still whisper his name in the arenas of the blood god's realm, not in reverence, not in hatred, but in unease. For Khorne remembers him. The champion was once mortal. They all are at the beginning. He was born beneath a red sky, on a feral world where war was not a season but the climate itself. Steel sang louder than prayer, and children learned to kill before they learned to speak. His name before damnation has been lost, scoured away like flesh from bone. But his deeds earned him another name, spoken only after screams had ended. Gorath the Unbowed. He rose through slaughter with terrifying inevitability. Where other warriors fought for survival, Gorath fought for dominance. He did not pray to Khorne. He did not bargain. He simply killed, methodically, relentlessly, as if the universe itself owed him blood. Entire tribes fell beneath his axe. Cities burned not as offerings, but as statements. When the butcher's nails were offered to him by a wandering warband of world-eaters, he crushed the tech priest's skull instead, and took the implants from his corpse, forcing them into his own flesh without ceremony. Pain sharpened him. Rage refined him. Khorne noticed. The first sign was the sky. On the battlefield where Gorath stood ankle-deep in corpses, the clouds tore open and bled fire. Demons poured forth, screaming praise, hurling themselves at his enemies, and then, when none remained, at Gorath himself. He killed them too. Every last one. When the slaughter ended, he stood alone, chest heaving, gore dripping from his armor, as a colossal presence loomed behind his thoughts. A throne of brass, a mountain of skulls, a god who does not speak but commands. Khorne did not ask for Gorath's allegiance. He claimed it. Ascension followed. Gorath's flesh hardened into something more than muscle and bone. His blood burned like liquid iron. His axe, once a crude slab of sharpened metal, became a demon weapon that screamed for violence even as it obeyed only him. He was unleashed upon the stars as Khorne's champion, a living apocalypse hurled into war zones where even space marines feared to tread. He butchered Eldar aspect warriors mid-leap, tore apart Imperial knights with his bare hands, and broke Orc wargs by killing their war bosses one by one, mounting their skulls while the greenskins watched in stunned silence. Entire crusades vanished from Imperial records after encountering him. To his followers, Gorath was proof that Khorne rewarded strength alone. But something festered beneath the rage. Each victory brought less satisfaction. Each mountain of skulls felt smaller than the last. Gorath began to notice something unsettling. Every battle, no matter how grand, ended the same way, with him still standing, and the hunger unfulfilled. The nails screamed louder, but the thrill dulled. He had conquered worlds, he had drowned systems in blood, and still Khorne demanded more. It was during the siege of Blackpire, a demon-forged world locked in eternal war, that Gorath realized the truth. He stood amid endless carnage, his axe shattered, his armor cracked, surrounded by demons kneeling in worship. Above him, the warp roiled in approval. And in that moment, clarity cut sharper than any blade. This was all he would ever be, a weapon, a trophy, a source of amusement for a god who would never be satisfied. The rage that followed was different. It was cold, focused, directed not outward but upward. Gorath began to fight not for Khorne, but in spite of him. He slaughtered rival champions with particular cruelty, not to please the blood god, but to thin his ranks. He refused demon boons, tearing warp entities apart when they attempted to bind themselves to him. He carved sigils of defiance into his own flesh, each one a challenge etched in blood. The demons noticed first. Whispers spread through the brass citadel. The Skulltakers watched him more closely. The throne itself loomed heavier in the warp whenever Gorath fought, as if Khorne leaned forward in interest or suspicion. The final act began when Gorath did the unthinkable. He turned away from a battlefield. A loyalist world burned below him, its defenders broken, ripe for slaughter. The warp howled, urging him forward. Instead, Gorath looked skyward and roared a challenge, not to the Imperium, not to fate, but to Khorne himself. The cry tore through reality, splitting the veil. The battlefield froze, time stuttering as a rift yawned open before him. The realm beyond was not summoned. It was invaded. Gorath stepped into the domain of Khorne alive, unbidden, dragging reality behind him like a wound. The brass citadel rose in the distance, impossibly vast, its steps slick with gore, its air thick with the sound of endless war. Demons turned in shock as he advanced, killing anything that stood between him and the throne. Bloodletters fell by the thousands. Juggernauts screamed as their riders were torn free and beaten to death with their own skulls. Each kill should have empowered Khorne, but instead, something strange happened. The realm trembled. For the first time since the war in heaven, Khorne's domain felt resistance. Gorath climbed the steps of the throne alone, his armor barely holding together, his blood boiling away into steam. At the summit, the blood god loomed, vast beyond comprehension, an embodiment of violence so pure it bent the warp around it. Skulls shifted beneath the god's presence. Rivers of blood surged and recoiled. Gorath raised his broken axe, not in worship, in execution. For a moment, that defied eternity. Nothing happened. No thunder, no instant annihilation. Just a champion and a god, facing one another across a sea of skulls. Then Khorne moved. What followed was not a battle as mortals understand it. It was a collision of concepts, rage against rage, will against inevitability. Gorath struck, and the blow landed, not on flesh, but on the idea of Khorne itself. The throne cracked. Blood sprayed upward, not from Gorath, but from the god's realm. Demons screamed in terror. Khorne roared, not in pain, but in something dangerously close to surprise. Gorath was lifted, crushed, unmade, and remade in the same instant. His body burned away, yet his will refused to die. He laughed as he was torn apart, his defiance echoing through the warp like a scar that would never fully heal. When it ended, Gorath was gone. The throne remained, but it was no longer whole. To this day, the brass citadel bears a fracture no demon can explain. A flaw that bleeds endlessly. And when the wars rage highest, when champions boast too loudly of Khorne's favor, a silence sometimes falls across the realm, heavy, watchful, as if the blood god remembers the one who dared to raise a blade against him, and waits to see if another will try to finish what Gorath began. The fracture in the brass citadel never healed. It could not. The wound was not made of matter nor even of warp stuff, but of defiance, a memory etched into a god's dominion. Blood flowed around it, never over it, as though reality itself refused to forget. In the ages that followed, Khorne said nothing of Gorath. He did not need to. Silence, in the realm of the blood god, was louder than any roar. Yet the consequences spread outward like shockwaves through the Imperium. Champions began to dream. They dreamed of a throne cracked down its spine, of a colossal shadow leaning forward as if listening. They dreamed of an axe shattered at the foot of divinity, and of laughter that did not belong to a demon. Many awoke screaming. Some awoke inspired. A few awoke changed. Among them was Vrax, once a lord of the World Eaters, whose armor was older than most imperial civilizations. He had dedicated 10,000 years to slaughter, his every breath an offering to Khorne. He had stood before the skull throne envisioned countless times, kneeling, roaring, begging for greater wars. But after Gorath's defiance, his visions shifted. Now, when Kael'gor closed his eyes, he did not kneel. He stood. He saw the fracture. He felt something he had not known since his mortal days. A question. Was Khorne invincible? The thought should have killed him. Lesser beings had been annihilated for far less, but the thought persisted, worming its way between the spikes of his faith. Kael'gor tried to drown it in blood. He led massacres so vast they distorted star charts. He piled skulls into mountains visible from orbit. Still, the question remained. Elsewhere, in the warp's darker eddies, demons whispered in voices barely audible even to themselves. Some claimed the throne had bled. Others insisted the fracture was a test, proof of Khorne's strength, not weakness. The skull-takers hunted more fervently than ever, purging any hint of dissent. Entire legions of bloodletters vanished, erased not by enemies but by their own god's displeasure. And yet, something had undeniably changed. For the first time, Khorne watched his champions not merely as tools, but as variables. On a dead moon orbiting a shattered gas giant, Kael'gor Vrax found proof that Gorath's story had not ended with annihilation. He had come seeking an ancient arena, a place where demons once tested mortal champions. What he found instead was a relic embedded in blackened stone, a fragment of an axe. It radiated wrongness, not the screaming malice of demon weapons, nor the cold indifference of Xeno's tech. This fragment was quiet, heavy with meaning. Blood evaporated when it touched the shard, hissing into nothingness. Kael'gor felt his nails stutter. When his gauntlet closed around the fragment, the warp recoiled. For a heartbeat, the roar in his mind went silent, and in that silence he saw Gorath, not as a champion, not as a godslayer, but as a man standing alone at the edge of an infinite abyss, refusing to bow. The vision shattered Kael'gor's certainty. He dropped the fragment, falling to his knees, roaring not in rage, but in something dangerously close to grief. The nails screamed back to life, but they could not erase what he had seen. Gorath had not vanished. He had been scattered. Across the warp, fragments of his will, his defiance, had embedded themselves like shrapnel in the fabric of Khorne's realm. Not enough to threaten the blood god, not enough to weaken him, but enough to remember. Kael'gor was not the only one who found such relics. A Khornat warband on the edge of the maelstrom unearthed a skull that whispered not of slaughter, but of choice. A demon engine on a forge world refused commands, turning its weapons skyward before detonating in a column of crimson light. In the eye of terror, a bloodthirster paused mid-massacre, its axe hovering as if awaiting an order that never came. Each incident was erased, covered up, explained away as weakness purged. But patterns do not require witnesses to exist. Khorne felt it all. The blood god did not fear Gorath's remnants. Fear was not in his nature. But there was irritation, a grinding pressure against his endless hunger. The fracture in the throne pulsed during great wars, reacting not to bloodshed, but to moments of hesitation, to champions who paused before the killing blow, to warriors who wondered, not if they should kill, but why. This could not be allowed to spread. Khorne answered not with words, but with escalation. He unleashed a new breed of champion, avatars forged directly from his essence, bound with no mortal will to rebel. They descended upon the galaxy like falling meteors, annihilating friend and foe alike. Entire sectors burned, their screams feeding the blood god in torrents unseen since the heresy. The message was clear. Defiance would be drowned. Kael'gor Vrax felt that message burn into his bones. He watched as one such avatar butchered his warband, carving through centuries of brotherhood in moments. Kael'gor survived only because the avatar ignored him, as one ignores a spent shell casing. That, more than anything, broke him. He gathered what remained of Gorath's fragments, not just the axe shard, but stories, echoes, forbidden memories ripped from the warp by sorcerers who knew the cost of such knowledge. Piece by piece, Kael'gor assembled a truth that terrified him. Gorath had not tried to kill Khorne to take his place. He had tried to remind a god what it meant to be challenged. Gods of the warp fed on extremes, unquestioning devotion, absolute rebellion. Khorne was strongest when war was simple. Kill or be killed, blood for blood's sake. Gorath had introduced something far more dangerous: intent. The fracture was not a wound of weakness. It was a scar of meaning. Kael'gor understood then why Khorne had not erased Gorath completely. Why the remnants persisted, why the throne bled but did not shatter. To destroy Gorath utterly would require acknowledging him, not as a weapon, but as an equal in defiance. And that was something Khorne could never do. The realization hit Kael'gor like a blade through the chest. He was not meant to become another Gorath. None of them were. The true danger was not a champion who could kill a god, but the idea that gods could be confronted at all. As Kael'gor prepared for what he knew would be his final act, the warp trembled again. Not with rage, not with bloodlust, but with attention. Far away upon the skull throne, Khorne leaned forward. The fracture pulsed. And for the first time since Gorath's laughter faded into the warp, the blood god waited, not for slaughter, but for a choice yet to be made. The waiting was worse than the wars. Kael'gor felt it everywhere now, in the way the warp pressed closer to real space, in the unnatural stillness before battles that should have begun with thunder. Even the nails seemed uncertain, their usual howling rhythm slipping into irregular spasms, as though they too sensed that something fundamental had shifted. Khorne was watching. Not judging, not commanding, watching. Kael'gor stood upon the bridge of his flagship, a vessel stitched together from the carcasses of defeated Imperial cruisers, its hulls echoing with distant screams chained into its engines. Before him, a dead system burned. Planets cracked under orbital bombardment, their atmospheres peeling away like flayed skin. It was slaughter on a scale that once would have filled him with exultation. Now it felt rehearsed. He could almost feel the fracture pulsing somewhere beyond sight, reacting not to the bloodshed itself, but to his indifference toward it. The realization sickened him. For 10,000 years, he had believed himself the perfect servant of the blood god. Now he understood the truth. He had been predictable. The fragments of Gorath were no longer just relics to him. They were lenses, ways of seeing the warp that no demon could offer. Through them, Kael'gor began to notice inconsistencies in Khorne's realm. Moments where the endless battle stuttered, where demons repeated the same charge, the same kill, the same scream, as if trapped in a loop too old to question itself. War without reflection, war without evolution. It dawned on Kael'gor that Khorne had not grown stronger over the ages. He had grown static. This was the secret buried beneath the throne's fracture. The blood god fed on violence, but only on violence that reaffirmed what already was. Endless repetition, endless rage. Gorath had not threatened Khorne by striking him. He had threatened him by introducing novelty. Defiance was not refusal. Defiance was change. The first true rupture came when Kael'gor did the unthinkable. He spared an enemy. On the ash-choked surface of a hive world, Kael'gor stood over a broken Imperial general, the man's power sword shattered, his body pinned beneath rubble. The battlefield had gone quiet, the last defenders dead or fleeing. The nails screamed for the kill, louder than they ever had. Kael'gor raised his chain axe. Then he stopped. The general looked up at him, not with defiance but with exhaustion. A man who had already lost everything worth fighting for. Killing him would mean nothing. It would change nothing. Kael'gor turned away. The sky screamed. Reality convulsed as if struck. Blood letters burst from the air itself, not charging the Imperials, but Kael'gor. Their howls were not of rage, but of correction. An error had occurred, and it needed to be fixed. Kael'gor fought them off, carving through dozens, then hundreds, but something was different now. Every kill felt hollow. The nails faltered again. When the last demon fell, Kael'gor stood shaking, his armor cracked, his mind reeling. He realized with a clarity that terrified him that Khorne had not punished him for mercy. Khorne had panicked. That was when the blood god finally acted. The warp tore open above Kael'gor, not violently, but with surgical precision. From the rift descended something new, a figure wreathed in red lightning, its form constantly reshaping, neither demon nor avatar, but something closer to a living decree. Where it stepped, the ground liquefied into blood. It did not roar. It spoke. "You stray." The voice was not sound, but pressure, collapsing Kael'gor's thoughts inward. He dropped to one knee, not in submission, but under the sheer weight of divine presence. The being raised a blade formed from condensed rage, its edge vibrating with unspent annihilation. Kael'gor looked up and laughed, not because he was fearless, but because he finally understood. "You're not here to kill me," he said, blood pouring from his helm. "You're here to stop the idea." The entity hesitated, just for a fraction of eternity. That hesitation was everything. Kael'gor hurled himself forward, not to strike the being, but to embrace it. The impact shattered both of them, flinging fragments of essence and flesh into the warp. The battlefield vanished, replaced by a vision, not of Khorne's throne, but of the blood god himself, vast and formless, bound to his domain by chains made of expectation. Kael'gor saw it then. The truth no demon could speak. Khorne was not imprisoned by his enemies, he was imprisoned by his worshippers. Every unquestioning kill, every mindless act of slaughter reinforced the shape of the god, locking him into a singular expression of rage. Gorath had sensed it instinctively. Kael'gor now saw it plainly. To change Khorne, even to wound him, required not greater violence, but a refusal to be simple. Kael'gor's body reformed in real space, broken but alive. The entity was gone, dissolved into the warp, its purpose unfulfilled. Across the stars, battles paused as champions felt something ripple through their connection to the blood god, a momentary dissonance like a drumbeat out of time. Khorne roared, not in fury, in denial. The fracture in the throne widened, and somewhere deep within the warp, something ancient and terrible began to stir, not a rival god, not a rebellion, but a possibility Khorne had not faced since his birth. The possibility that war could mean more than blood. As Kael'gor staggered to his feet, gazing up at a sky that refused to settle, one final realization settled over him, heavy and inescapable. Gorath had never been alone. He had been the first. He had been the first. The thought echoed through Kael'gor's shattered mind as the sky finally settled. Clouds knitting themselves back together like a wound pretending it had never existed. The battlefield lay quiet. Too quiet. The dead remained where they had fallen, blood cooling, smoke thinning. No triumphant roar followed, no divine acknowledgement, only absence. For the first time in his long existence, Kael'gor felt truly alone. That loneliness spread. Across war zones light years apart, champions paused mid-slaughter, axes hovering inches from flesh. Some dismissed the sensation as weakness and struck anyway. Others hesitated, and in that hesitation felt the same unsettling silence Kael'gor now carried within him. The galaxy did not notice all at once. It never does. But patterns began to form. A cornate berserker stood over a wounded sister of battle and found his vision filled not with rage, but with memory. Of a childhood he could not name, of a face long forgotten. He killed her seconds later, screaming to drown out the echo. But the memory remained. On a demon world, a gladiator dropped his weapon after defeating his final opponent, refusing the killing blow. The arena erupted into violence, demons tearing him apart, but the crowd's roar fractured, uncertain, like a chant forgotten mid-verse. Each moment was tiny, insignificant. Together, they were seismic. Kael'gor gathered those who could feel it. Not openly, never openly. He left signs instead. Symbols carved into battlefield debris, fractured skulls arranged in deliberate imperfection, echoes of Gorath's defiance encoded into carnage itself. Those who noticed followed. Those who didn't were never meant to. They came to him broken, furious, terrified of their own thoughts. Champions, warlords, even demons who had begun to dream of stillness. Kael'gor did not preach. He did not promise victory. He only spoke one truth, over and over, until it took root. Khorne is not listening anymore, he said. He is bracing. The reaction was immediate and brutal. Khorne's realm convulsed as if struck by a hammer from within. The skies above the brass citadel ignited, raining fire and screaming faces. The skull throne bled rivers, the fracture splitting further, jagged now, visible from every corner of the domain. Avatars descended in numbers unseen since the birth of the blood god, scouring entire regions of the warp, erasing champions whose devotion wavered for even a heartbeat. Worlds burned faster. Wars escalated beyond reason. Khorne was not correcting an error now. He was flooding the system. Kael'gor felt the pressure mounting like a fist around his heart. Every death fed the blood god, yes, but it also fed the fracture. Each act of unquestioning slaughter strengthened the old shape of Khorne, while every moment of intent, of choice, widened the wound. The galaxy had become a battleground not of armies, but of meaning, and meaning was dangerous. Kael'gor knew what was coming before the first sign appeared. He felt it in the nails as they screamed, not with hunger, but with warning. He felt it in the warp's tightening grip, like the sudden stillness before a storm breaks. Khorne was done watching. The sky over the skull throne darkened, not with clouds, but with absence. Great swathes of the warp going silent, devoured by a presence too vast to comprehend. The throne began to rise, not physically, but conceptually, lifting itself above the endless war below. For the first time since the galaxy learned the meaning of bloodshed, Khorne stood. The act sent shockwaves through reality. Mortal psychers across the Imperium collapsed, screaming as their minds brushed against something too absolute to survive. Demon worlds cracked open. Even the other Chaos gods took notice, their attention turning toward the Blood God with something like wary curiosity. Kael'gor felt it then, a pull, irresistible and final, not a command, an invitation. The fragments of Gorath within him burned, aligning, resonating like pieces of a broken blade reforging themselves. Kael'gor understood with dreadful clarity what Khorne intended. This would not be annihilation, not punishment. This would be resolution. Khorne would force the issue. He would confront the fracture directly, not by acknowledging it, but by overwhelming it, by dragging every last echo of defiance into his presence and crushing it in a single defining act. A god does not adapt easily, but he can end a question. Kael'gor gathered those who had followed the signs. They stood with him at the edge of a widening rift, the warp churning beyond like a blood-red ocean. Some were mortals, some were demons twisted by doubt, none expected to survive. "This isn't about killing a god," Kael'gor told them, his voice calm despite the storm tearing at his armor. It never was. One of them asked the question they were all thinking. "Then what is it about?" Kael'gor looked into the rift, into the impossible vastness waiting beyond, and felt Gorath's presence settle around him. Not as a voice, but as resolve. "Making him choose," Kael'gor said. They stepped into the warp together. The journey was agony. Reality peeled away layer by layer, each step stripping memory, identity, certainty. Kael'gor saw his past unravel, every kill, every oath, every moment of blind devotion laid bare. He felt Khorne's gaze upon him now, no longer distant, no longer abstract. It was close, unavoidable. They emerged upon a plain of skulls stretching into infinity. The brass citadel looming ahead, no longer static but shifting, reconfiguring itself around the rising god. The throne towered above them, cracked and bleeding, its wound now a gaping chasm of pulsing red light. Khorne's presence filled everything. There was no sky, no horizon, only pressure, purpose. War condensed into form. Kael'gor advanced alone. Each step felt like walking against a hurricane of intent. Demons lined the path but did not attack. They watched, silent, uncertain, as though awaiting instruction that had not yet arrived. At the base of the throne, Kael'gor stopped. He could feel it now, the truth that had been building since Gorath's strike. The fracture was not spreading on its own. It required witnesses, participants, those willing to stand and not kneel. Khorne loomed above him, vast beyond scale, the embodiment of every battle ever fought for no reason other than itself. The blood god did not speak. He did not need to. Kael'gor raised his head, meeting a gaze that could unmake stars, and felt no rage rise within him. Only clarity. This was the moment everything balanced on. Not a battle, a decision. The fracture pulsed, brighter than ever, casting long shadows across the throne room. The gathered demons leaned forward, the warp itself seeming to hold its breath. And Kael'gor realized with a cold, steady certainty that whatever happened next would not just decide his fate or Khorne's, it would decide what war would mean forever. The blood god shifted, and the universe waited for the answer. The blood god did not strike. That alone shattered every expectation Kael'gor had ever carried into battle. Khorne loomed above him, vast beyond scale, a shape defined not by flesh but by consequence. Every war ever fought screamed within that presence. Every blade raised without hesitation, every death given meaning only by repetition. The pressure was unbearable, yet Kael'gor remained standing, held upright by something quieter than rage. Choice. The fracture pulsed like a second heart in the throne, its light bleeding across the plain of skulls. With every beat, memories surfaced, moments that had never belonged in Khorne's realm. A warrior hesitating, a champion thinking, a blade lowered. Khorne's gaze fixed upon Kael'gor, and then, impossibly, the god leaned closer. The warp screamed as the distance collapsed. Kael'gor felt himself stretched thin, every thought exposed, every doubt laid bare. He felt Gorath's fragments ignite within him, not as power, but as alignment. All those scattered defiant echoes were here now, drawn together by inevitability. "You are not here to win," Kael'gor said, his voice barely holding shape. "You're here because you can't ignore it anymore." The throne shook. For the first time since the galaxy learned to bleed, Khorne hesitated. Not in action, but in definition. The blood god had always been absolute. Rage without question. Violence without reflection. But now, before him, stood something that could not be reduced to slaughter. A warrior who refused to be simple. Khorne moved at last, not to kill, to test. The pressure intensified, warping the plane as if reality itself were being folded inward. Kael'gor's armor cracked, his flesh burned. The nails howled, demanding surrender to instinct, begging him to fall back into the comfort of blind rage. He did not. Instead, Kael'gor stepped forward. Each step was agony. Each step stripped something away, titles, victories, centuries of bloodshed. What remained was not a champion, not a warlord, but a single will refusing to dissolve. "I am not your enemy," Kael'gor said, blood streaming from his eyes. "I am your consequence." The fracture erupted with light. The throne split further, the crack widening into a chasm that revealed not blood, but memory. Wars replayed themselves within it, not as triumphs, but as loops, endless, unchanging, hollow. Khorne recoiled, not in fear but in recognition. This was what Gorath had struck, not the god, the stagnation. Kael'gor understood then the truth that lay beneath everything. Khorne did not fear death. He did not fear defeat. He feared irrelevance, a universe where war meant nothing but repetition, a galaxy where blood flowed without intention, feeding a god who could no longer grow. Kael'gor raised his empty hands. "I won't kill you," he said. "I won't replace you. I won't kneel." The words landed heavier than any blow. Around them, the demons watched in stunned silence. Some trembled, some screamed, some simply vanished, unable to exist in a moment that demanded more than obedience. Khorne roared then, not in rage, but in resistance. The sound tore through the warp, cracking demon worlds, collapsing battlefields mid-fight. Across the galaxy, warriors felt it in their bones, a primal command to choose a side. The roar faltered, just slightly, because something answered it, not another god, not a rival. The answer came from mortals, from every battlefield where a warrior paused, from every moment where rage met thought, from every champion who felt the fracture and did not turn away. Their choices echoed through the warp, feeding the chasm with something Khorne had never truly consumed before. Intent. The blood god staggered, not physically, conceptually. His form rippled, edges blurring as the absolute certainty that had defined him began to loosen. He was still immense, still terrifying, still war incarnate. But now, war with direction, war with stakes. Kael'gor felt himself beginning to fade. His purpose was being fulfilled, and the warp was already reclaiming the excess. He did not fight it. He had never sought survival. Khorne's gaze locked onto him one final time, and in that gaze, Kael'gor saw it. Not hatred, respect. The god did not bow. He did not speak. But the pressure shifted. The fracture stabilized, no longer widening, no longer bleeding uncontrollably. It became something else, a scar, permanent and visible, a reminder etched into divinity. Khorne straightened. The skull throne reformed, not whole, but changed. Its jagged wound remained, glowing faintly, impossible to ignore. The brass citadel settled around it, reshaping itself to accommodate imperfection. The blood god turned away. The message rippled outward like a shockwave. War would continue, but it would no longer be mindless. Kael'gor collapsed to his knees as the warp began to calm, the pressure lifting like a storm passing overhead. His followers felt it too, the moment the impossible had passed, leaving behind a silence heavier than any roar. Kael'gor smiled weakly. Gorath had struck the first blow. He had delivered the answer. As Kael'gor's form finally dissolved, scattering into the warp like embers carried on a dying wind, the last thing he felt was not pain or triumph or regret. It was relief. Across the galaxy, battles resumed, but something had changed. Warriors fought harder, smarter, with purpose sharpened by choice. Blood still flowed, skulls still fell. But now, somewhere deep within the warp, a god watched not just the act of war, but the will behind it. And the throne of Khorne, forever bloodied, would never again be unquestioned. The galaxy did not end. Stars still burned. Fleets still crossed the void. The great engines of empire, Xeno's ambition and Chaos ambition alike, continued to grind against one another, as they always had. To most, nothing had changed at all. But war remembered. In the warp, the storm slowly settled into a new rhythm. Not quieter, never quieter, but different. The endless roar softened into a cadence, like a drumbeat that now waited for the next strike instead of demanding it. The brass citadel stood firm, its towers still crowned with trophies, its halls still echoing with the sounds of conflict, but the fracture in the skull throne remained, glowing faintly like a dying ember that refused to go out. Demons passed it without comment. They could not speak of it. Some could not even perceive it directly, but all of them felt it, like a splinter beneath the skin of eternity. Khorne did not rage. He did not celebrate. He watched. Where once his gaze had been fixed only on the quantity of blood spilled, it now lingered on moments that defied pattern. A duel fought not for spectacle, but for resolution. A warrior who chose a harder path instead of the fastest kill. A battle ended decisively, not endlessly. War still fed him, but now it fed him differently. Across the material galaxy, the change surfaced in subtle ways. Khornate warbands became more dangerous, not less, more disciplined, more focused, their campaigns deliberate rather than frenzied. They sought worthy foes, meaningful victories. Empty slaughter began to feel wasteful. Imperial commanders noticed it first in the data. Engagements that once spiraled into endless attrition now ended abruptly, decisively. Victories were rarer, but defeats were cleaner. Survivors spoke of enemies who fought like storms with direction, not hurricanes tearing at random. No one spoke Kael'gor's name. No one spoke Gorath's. They did not need to. Their absence carried weight enough. In the warp's quieter reaches, fragments of will drifted like ash on unseen currents. Not souls, not ghosts. Echoes of resolve, too diffuse to form thought, too stubborn to vanish. They brushed against minds at the edge of battle, never instructing, never commanding, only reminding. You can choose. Some recoiled from that whisper, burying it beneath ritual and fury. Others carried it silently, unsure why it mattered, only that it did. Even the other gods noticed. Tzeentch watched with interest, seeing patterns shift in ways that could not be fully predicted. Nurgle felt the cycles of decay tighten as wars concluded instead of festering endlessly. Slaanesh sensed a sharpening of sensation, conflict distilled into purpose rather than excess. None intervened. This was not their domain. Khorne stood alone upon his throne, vast and immovable, the embodiment of battle itself. The scar beneath him glowed faintly, neither healing nor spreading. It was not a weakness. It was a reminder that even a god is shaped by what he consumes. And far from the warp, on a nameless world where the ruins of an ancient battlefield lay half-buried beneath drifting sand, a lone warrior paused as the sun dipped below the horizon. His armor bore no sigils, his weapon dulled by time rather than use. He had fought his last war years ago, though he could not say why he had stopped. Only that one day the killing had felt finished. He knelt, not in prayer, but in exhaustion, resting his hand against the ground where countless lives had ended long before his own had begun. The wind whispered across the ruins, carrying with it no voices, no commands, only silence, deep and honest. The warrior closed his eyes, and for a moment the galaxy held still. Perhaps this was the true legacy of the Bloodied Throne. Not the crack in the brass, not the god who had been challenged, but the idea left behind, that even in a universe built on endless conflict, meaning could still be carved from chaos. That strength was not only found in rage, that war, if it must exist, could be more than noise. Somewhere beyond time and flesh, the echoes of Gorath and Kael'gor drifted together, indistinguishable now from the greater current. They did not watch, they did not judge. Their work was finished. The question remained, however, quiet, patient, waiting to be asked again. In a universe that knows only war, what happens when warriors begin to decide why they fight? And if even a god can be changed by the choices of mortals, what truly is inevitable? The stars offered no answer, but they continued to burn,